Kurt Vonnegut, November 11th, 1922 to April the 11th, 2007, was an American writer and humorist known for his satirical and darkly humorous novels. In a career spanning over 50 years, he published 14 novels, 3 short story collections, 5 plays, and 5 non-fiction works. Further collections have been published after his death. Born and raised in Indianapolis, Vonnegut attended Cornell University but withdrew in January 1943 and enlisted in the U.S. Army. As part of his training, he studied mechanical engineering at the Carnegie Institute of Technology and the University of Tennessee. He was then deployed to Europe to fight in World War II and was captured by the Germans during the Battle of the Bulge. He was interned in Dresden, where he survived the Allied bombing of the city in a meat locker of the slaughterhouse where he was imprisoned. The bombing of Dresden. The bombing of Dresden was a joint British and American aerial bombing attack on the city of Dresden, the capital of the German state of Saxony during World War II. In 4 raids between 13th and 15th of February 1945, 772 heavy bombers of the Royal Air Force and 527 of the United States Army Air Forces dropped more than 3,900 tons of high explosive bombs and incendiary devices on the city. The bombing and the resulting firestorm destroyed more than 1,006 acres of the city centre, 6.5 square kilometres. Up to 25,000 people were killed. 3 more American air raids followed, 2 occurring on the 2nd of March aimed at the city's railway marshalling yard, and 1 smaller raid on the 17th of April aimed at industrial areas. Post-war discussions about whether the attacks were justified and the tens of thousands of civilians killed led to the event becoming one of the moral cause célèbre of the war. Nazi Germany's desperate struggle to maintain resistance in the closing months of the war is widely known in the present day, but Allied intelligence assessments at the time gave a different picture. There was uncertainty over the ability of the Russian advance to maintain momentum, and rumours of the establishment of a Nazi redoubt in southern Germany were taken too seriously. After the war, he married Jane Marie Cox, with whom he had 3 children. Vonnegut adopted 3 of his sister's sons after she died of cancer and her husband was killed in a train accident. He and his wife both attended the University of Chicago while he worked as a night reporter for the City News Bureau. Vonnegut published his first novel, Play a Piano, in 1952. The novel received positive reviews but was not commercially successful at the time. In the nearly 20 years that followed, he published several novels that were well regarded, 2 of which, The Sirens of Titan, 1959, and Cat's Cradle, 1963, were nominated for the Hugo Award for Best Science Fiction or Fantasy Novel of the Year. He published a short story collection titled Welcome to the Monkey House in 1968. His breakthrough was his commercially and critically successful 6th novel, SlaughterHouse Five, in 1969. SlaughterHouse Five. SlaughterHouse Five, or The Children's Crusade, A Duty Dance with Death, is a 1969 semi-autobiographic science fiction-infused anti-war novel by Kurt Vonnegut. It follows the life and experiences of Billy Pilgrim from his early years to his time as an American soldier and chaplain's assistant during World War II to the post-war years, with Billy occasionally travelling through time. The text centres on Billy's capture by the German army and his survival of the Allied firebombing of Dresden as a prisoner of war, an experience which Vonnegut himself lived through as an American serviceman. The work has been called an example of unmatched moral clarity and one of the most enduring anti-war novels of all time. The story is told in a non-linear order by an unreliable narrator. He begins the novel by telling the reader all this happened, more or less. Events become clear through flashbacks and descriptions of time travel experiences. In the first chapter, the narrator describes his writing of the book, his experiences as a University of Chicago anthropology student and a Chicago City News Bureau correspondent, his research on the Children's Crusade and the history of Dresden, and his visit to Cold War-era Europe with his wartime friend Bernard V. O'Hare. He then writes about Billy Pilgrim, an American man from the fictional town of Ilium, New York, who believes that he was held at one time in an alien zoo on a planet he calls Tralfamador, and that he has experienced time travel. The Children's Crusade was a failed popular crusade by European Christians to establish a second Latin kingdom of Jerusalem in the Holy Land, said to have taken place in 1212. Although it is called the Children's Crusade, it never received the papal approval from Pope Innocent III to be an actual crusade. The traditional narrative is likely conflated from a mix of factual and mythical events, which include the preaching of visions by a French boy and a German boy, an intention to peacefully convert Muslims in the Holy Land to Christianity, bands of children marching to Italy and the children being sold into slavery in Tunis. The crusaders of the real events on which the story is based left areas of Germany led by Nicholas of Cologne and northern France led by Stephen of Cloyes. The variants of the long-standing story of the Children's Crusade have similar themes. A boy begins to preach in either France or Germany, claiming that he had been visited by Jesus, who instructed him to lead a crusade in order to peacefully convert Muslims to Christianity. Through a series of portents and miracles, he gains a following of up to 30,000 children. He leads his followers south towards the Mediterranean Sea in the belief that the sea would part on their arrival, which would allow him and his followers to walk to Jerusalem. This does not happen. The children are sold to two merchants, Hugh the Iron and William of Poscares, who give free passage on boats to as many of the children as are willing. The pilgrims are then either taken to Tunisia, where they are sold into slavery by the merchants, or else die in a shipwreck on San Pietro Island off Sardinia during a gale. Kurt Vonnegut Jr.'s paternal great-grandfather, Clemens Vonnegut, settled in Indianapolis and founded the Vonnegut Hardware Company. His father and grandfather, Bernard, were architects. The architecture firm under Kurt Senior designed such buildings as Das Deutsche Haus, now called the Athenaeum, the Indian headquarters of the Bell Telephone Company, and the Fletcher Trust Building. Vonnegut's mother was born into Indianapolis high society, as her family, the Liebers, were amongst the wealthiest in the city, with their fortune deriving from ownership of a successful brewery. The financial security and social prosperity that the Vonneguts had once enjoyed were destroyed in a matter of years. The Liebers Brewery was closed in 1921 after the advent of Prohibition. When the Great Depression hit, few people could afford to build, causing clients at Kurt Senior's architectural firm to become scarce. Vonnegut's brother and sister had finished their primary and secondary educations in private schools, but Vonnegut was placed in a public school called Public School Number 43. He was bothered by the Great Depression, and both his parents were affected deeply by their economic misfortune. His father withdrew from normal life and became what Vonnegut called a dreamy artist. His mother became depressed, withdrawn, bitter, and abusive. She laboured to regain the family's wealth and status, and Vonnegut said that she expressed hatred for her husband that was as corrosive as hydrochloric acid. Excerpt from SlaughterHouse Five, page 132. He was down in the meat locker on the night that Dresden was destroyed. There were sounds like giant footsteps above. Those were sticks of high explosive bombs. The giants walked and walked. The meat locker was a very safe shelter. All that happened down there was an occasional shower of calcimine. The Americans and 4 of their guards and a few dressed carcasses were down there, and nobody else. The rest of the guards had, before the raid began, gone to the comforts of their own homes in Dresden. They were all being killed with their families. So it goes. The girls that Billy had seen naked were all being killed too, in a much shallower shelter in another part of the stockyards. So it goes. A guard would go to the head of the stairs every so often to see what it was like outside. Then he would come down and whisper to the other guards. There was a firestorm out there. Dresden was one big flame. The one flame ate everything organic, everything that would burn. It wasn't safe to come out of the shelter until noon the next day. When the Americans and their guards did come out, the sky was black with smoke. The sun was an angry little pinhead. Dresden was like the moon now, nothing but minerals. The stones were hot. Everybody else in the neighbourhood was dead. So it goes. The book's anti-war sentiment resonated with its readers amidst the ongoing Vietnam War, and its reviews were generally positive. After its release, Slaughterhouse Five went to the top of the New York Times bestseller list, thrusting Vonnegut into fame. He was invited to give speeches, lectures, and commencement addresses around the country and received many awards and honours. Later in his career, Vonnegut published several autobiographical essay and short story collections, such as Fate's Worse Than Death, 1991, and A Man Without a Country, 2005. After his death, he was hailed as one of the most important contemporary writers and a dark humour commentator on American society. His son Mark published a compilation of his unpublished works titled Armageddon in Retrospect in 2008. In 2017, Seven Stories Press published Complete Stories, a collection of Vonnegut's short fiction, including 5 previously unpublished stories. Complete Stories was collected and introduced by Vonnegut friends and scholars Jerome Klinkowitz and Dan Wakefield. Numerous scholarly works have examined Vonnegut's writing and humour. Slaughterhouse Five excerpt, page 134. Dresden was destroyed on the night of February 13th, 1945. Billy Pilgrim began. We came out of our shelter the next day. He told Montana about the 4 guards who, in their astonishment and grief, resembled a barbershop quartet. He told her about the stockyards with all the fence posts gone, with roofs and windows gone, told her about seeing little logs lying around. These were people who had been caught in the firestorm. So it goes. Billy told her what had happened to the buildings that used to form cliffs around the stockyards. They had collapsed. Their wood had been consumed and their stones had crashed down, had tumbled against one another until they locked at last in low and graceful curves. It was like the moon, said Billy Pilgrim. The guards told the Americans to form in ranks of 4, which they did. Then they had them march back to the hog barn, which had been their home. Its walls still stood, but its windows and roof were gone, and there was nothing inside but ashes and dollops of melted glass. It was realized then that there was no food or water, and that the survivors, if they were going to continue to survive, were going to have to climb over curve after curve on the face of the moon, which they did. The curves were smooth only when seen from a distance. The people climbing them learned that they were treacherous, jagged things, hot to the touch, often unstable, eager should certain important rocks be disturbed to tumble some more, to form lower, more solid curves. Nobody talked much as the expedition crossed the moon. There was nothing appropriate to say. One thing was clear. Absolutely everybody in the city was supposed to be dead, regardless of what they were, and that anybody that moved in it represented a flaw in the design. There were to be no moon men at all. American fighter planes came in under the smoke to see if anything was moving. They saw Billy and the rest moving down there. The planes sprayed them with machine gun bullets, but the bullets missed. Then they saw some other people moving down by the riverside and they shot at them. They hit some of them. So it goes. The idea was to hasten the end of the war. Billy's story ended very curiously in a suburb untouched by fire and explosions. The guards and the Americans came at nightfall to an inn which was open for business. There was candlelight. There were fires in 3 fireplaces downstairs. There were empty tables and chairs waiting for anyone who might come, and empty beds with covers turned down upstairs. There was a blind innkeeper and his sighted wife, who was the cook, and their 2 young daughters, who worked as waitresses and maids. This family knew that Dresden was gone. Those with eyes had seen it burn and burn, understood that they were on the edge of a desert now. Still, they had opened for business, had polished the glasses and wound the clocks and stirred the fires and waited to see who would come. There was no great flow of refugees from Dresden. The clocks ticked on, the fires crackled, the translucent candles dripped. And then there was a knock on the door, and in came 4 guards and 100 American prisoners of war. The innkeeper asked the guards if they had come from the city. Yes. Are there more people coming? And the guards said that on the difficult route they had chosen, they had not seen another living soul.